Hey guys, tonight we're floating gently back through time, back to misty lakes and paddle-silent mornings, where farmers wore reed hats wider than dinner plates and coaxed vegetables to grow from mud that never touched solid ground. You're here, in the soft early hours of dawn, drifting quietly across the surface of Lake Xochimilco. The water is smooth, mirror flat, and the air is thick with dew that smells faintly of moss and last night's campfire smoke. This isn't your ordinary farm visit. There's no tractor, no boots, and absolutely no chance you'd survive this barefoot in modern times without stepping on a frog, slipping on lake weed, or being gently judged by a heron. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing who's drifting off from where in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning is heavy with fog that curls low to the water, and the first sounds you hear are not roosters or bells, but the creak of wooden poles slipping into silt, the splash of a lazy paddle, and the muffled thunk of a clay jar being loaded onto a reed raft. You squint ahead. There, rising out of the mist like a floating dream, is your destination. A Chinampa, one of the Aztec Empire's famous floating gardens. It's not a raft, really, more like an artificial island, built up from lake muck, reeds, and thyme. Lots and lots of thyme. They don't float in the bouncy, bobbing way boats do. They're anchored with willow roots and lashed to poles, held gently in place like shy guests at a polite party. You drift closer, the front of your canoe bumping softly into the edge of the plot. A man in a wide-brimmed hat looks up, not surprised to see you. He's been weeding since just before sunrise, sleeves rolled, face wrinkled from smiling too much in the sun. He offers you a seat on a reed mat beside the corn rows. The mat is damp. You sit anyway. The ground beneath you feels solid, but you know it isn't. It's a cleverly built raft of woven roots and logs, piled high with dredged mud from the lake bottom and composted vegetation. Centuries of layering have made it feel as sturdy as earth, but this island was made by hand, and by hoe. Historians agree the Chinampas were a marvel of ancient agriculture. Created to expand arable land in the marshy lake beds around Tenochtitlan, they turned aquatic chaos into organized paradise. Narrow canals separated the rows of floating fields, which crisscrossed like the fingers of a green hand reaching across the lake. Your host points at the water with his paddle. 15 plots, he says proudly. 2 for corn, 1 for beans, 1 for squash, 1 for flowers, the rest for whatever survives the ducks. He chuckles. Somewhere nearby, a duck honks as if on cue. Your feet dangle near the water's edge. It's shallow here, barely deeper than your knee, but thick with lily pads and the occasional flash of silver beneath. Minnows, frogs, little fish darting between the roots. These weren't just decorative. They played their part too, pooping nutrient-rich droppings that sank into the mud and fed the crops above. One mainstream historical fact: these Chinampas were ridiculously productive. Some estimates say they could yield up to 7 harvests a year. That's not a typo. 7. The Aztecs basically ran an organic floating miracle that fed their massive capital city long before industrial agriculture was even a twinkle in a spreadsheet. But don't get too impressed yet. That's just the beginning. Your host gestures toward a small corner where wildflowers grow in neat rows. Marigolds, periwinkle, and a few herbs you can't quite name. For the market, he says, and for the gods. You nod. In Aztec culture, flowers weren't just pretty. They were offerings, currency, medicine, and occasionally, metaphorical shade thrown during poetry slams. Yes, the Aztecs had those too. You reach down and run your fingers across the soil. It's damp, rich, loamy. This isn't ordinary dirt. It's built, crafted, a mix of lake sediment, decomposed plants, and something vaguely fishy. You don't ask. A breeze stirs, ruffling the tops of the maize plants, which stand tall like sleepy sentinels. Their leaves sway gently, casting moving shadows across the mat beside you. You look out at the other Chinampas, long, narrow strips of green, floating serenely in the fog like garden barges, each one tethered by unseen ropes, rooted in nothing and everything all at once. Historians still argue whether these early plots were truly floating in the way we picture rafts, or whether they were semi-permanent extensions of the lake bed. The truth, probably, is somewhere in between, floating enough to sway in a storm, fixed enough to carry generations of turnips. A heron lands nearby, shakes out its feathers, and gives you a look like it's judging your grasp of agricultural engineering. You nod in apology. The farmer rises, wipes his hands on his tunic, and tosses a handful of compost toward a mound of beans. They grow better when you talk to them, he says. You try. Hello, beans. The beans remain unmoved. But the farmer grins. You lie back on the mat now, gazing up as the fog begins to lift. The sky above is pale blue. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear. Somewhere in the distance, someone's playing a wooden flute, notes rising and curling like incense smoke across the water. And you? You're floating. On a farm. Built on water. Run by gardeners who coax life from mud, reeds, sun, and time. Nothing about it is fast. Nothing about it is easy. But everything about it feels right. The mist begins to thin, burned away gently by the rising sun. You can see more of the Chinampa now, its layout, its textures, the deliberate messiness of a garden that's been loved rather than managed. Your fingers brush the soft edge of a squash leaf, waxy and warm from the sunlight, and your host gestures for you to follow him. You step carefully. There's no real path, just foot-sized clearings between rows of maize and patches of amaranth. The soil is springy beneath your sandals. It breathes, or at least it feels like it does. And in a way, it sort of does. Because this isn't just a raft covered in dirt. It's a living structure, layered and lashed with purpose. A floating, breathing sponge of fertility. The farmer stoops and pulls back a layer of brush. Beneath it, the Chinampa's bones are revealed. Long wooden stakes, crisscrossed like a giant lattice, driven into the soft lake bed and interwoven with reeds and vines. Packed into these frames is thick black mud, dredged up from the lake bottom, a gooey, nutrient-rich pudding so potent it practically grows corn just by being looked at. The term for this process? A pantel. No, not a breakfast food. It's the canal and cultivation system that kept these plots endlessly fertile. Every few weeks, the farmers paddled out with flat-bottomed boats and scooped up fresh lake sediment, depositing it along the edges of their plots. A little top-up, a little love. The garden lives, and so does the lake. Historians agree. This was one of the most efficient and sustainable farming methods in pre-Columbian history. No pesticides, no synthetic fertilizer, just mud, sun, labor, and a spiritual respect for what the water could offer. You kneel beside the farmer as he plunges his hand into the soil. He pulls up a scoop and lets it fall slowly between his fingers. It's dark, clumpy, cool. "We feed the plants," he says. "But first, we feed the lake." You hear a plop nearby. A frog, unimpressed with your reverence, flops into a canal and vanishes with barely a ripple. The frames beneath the Chinampa are more than structural. They're alive. Not with movement, but with history. Some are over 100 years old, their wooden stakes softened by time and water. As they rot, they feed the soil, and new ones are driven in to take their place, woven with reeds and tied with tough lake vines. It's not building, really. It's gardening infrastructure. One fringe tidbit: some Chinampa builders claimed you could tell when a stake had earned retirement by the sound it made when tapped with a paddle. A low thunk meant it was tired. A sharp clack? Still some years left. Sound logic. Literally. You stand again and walk along the narrow edge of the Chinampa. On one side, water lilies drift like sleepy thoughts. On the other, rows of young chili plants blink up at the sky. Occasionally, you see short sticks poking from the mud, measuring markers maybe, or perhaps garden gossip posts. You're told some farmers marked important events by carving into the bark. First rain, first sprout, first heron to steal a worm. At the far end of the plot, you find a corner section under partial shade. Here, young saplings lean toward the water. These aren't for crops. They're willows, and they're essential. Their roots grow down and out, wrapping around the Chinampa, anchoring it with nature's most polite strangulation system. The roots don't choke. They cradle. They hug the soil tight. Without them, the whole thing might drift or slump or, heaven forbid, tip. You reach out and touch one of the trunks. It's cool, ridged, and slightly damp. The bark has been polished by years of human hands. This one may be the 100th pole planted in this garden, maybe more. There's something deeply comforting in that. A farm that remembers its own construction. A place where the act of planting isn't just seasonal, it's architectural. Everything is reused, the farmer says, gesturing to a pile of reeds drying in the sun. Old mats become compost. Broken baskets become mulch. Even the vines that tied last year's frame. New mulch tea. You blink. Mulch tea? He grins. For the corn. Of course. You watch as he gathers a bundle of reeds and begins weaving them into a new mat. His fingers move without thought, looping and bending like a spider on vacation. The mat will be used to edge a Chinampa bank, to hold in fresh soil, or maybe to sit on, or maybe both. Historians still debate whether early Chinampas were meant to be permanent from the start, or if they evolved from simpler, seasonal rafts. Some think the first ones were just floating compost barges. Others suggest they were intended for ceremonial herbs and flowers. The archaeological evidence is scattered, literally, across a very muddy lake bed. But one thing's clear. By the time Tenochtitlan rose to its full glory, these gardens weren't an experiment. They were infrastructure. They were cityscape. They were what made an island capital in the middle of a lake not just survivable, but delicious. The sun now rides higher in the sky. Mist has burned off entirely. Birds hop between corn rows. A dog barks on a distant shore. And the Chinampa beneath your feet? It doesn't budge. It holds you gently, like a lullaby made of dirt. You lie back again, arms behind your head, and stare up at the blue. One cloud drifts overhead, slow and unsure. Just like you. Just like the Chinampa. Built to float. Anchored anyway. A dragonfly hovers over your nose for a moment, its wings whirring like a tiny paper fan, then zips off to investigate a chili blossom. The sun's fully up now, and so is the gardener's cousin. He arrives in a wobbling canoe shaped like a long banana, waving one reed-hatted hand and chewing something suspiciously green. You're about to meet the men with flower rafts. He docks his boat with a lazy bump against the edge of the Chinampa, tossing over a basket that's bursting with marigolds, dahlias, and what looks like some kind of purple star-shaped bloom. The scent hits you like a warm breeze from a floral bakery. It's not cloying. It's golden. Market run, he says, then snorts. Or date insurance. Depends who you ask. He's not wrong. These flower bundles aren't just for altars or temple offerings. They're for gifts, courtships, funerals, festivals. Every occasion you can think of, and at least 3 you can't. In the Aztec world, flowers meant meaning. And if you showed up with the wrong kind, well, let's just say your romantic odds with the fruit seller's niece might wilt. You climb aboard his raft, carefully, and he hands you a paddle. 1 stroke, 2 breaths, he says, or you'll water the lilies with your knees. It's advice you take seriously. Together you push off, drifting through the narrow canals that thread the Chinampa maze like soft threads through velvet. It's quiet here, even with the occasional croak of a frog or the splash of a carp changing its mind. You pass by floating plots full of lettuce, squash, even tobacco. Some Chinampas are tidy. Others are exuberantly overgrown. All of them are alive. You notice the raft's floor is lined with mats, carefully woven and layered with reed padding. The flowers rest there gently, their colors vivid against the beige. Above them, a thin fabric canopy filters the light. Not to shade you, oh no. This is a flowers luxury barge. You're just here to steer. Historians note that flower cultivation on Chinampas was an art form as much as a practice. Specific blooms were assigned to deities, days, and even tones in spoken poetry. Some were thought to open wider when sung too. Others, allegedly, closed up if you swore near them. One fringe tale involves a chili farmer banned from a flower Chinampa after he insulted a marigold during a thunderstorm. The marigolds, according to his sister, never bloomed for him again. Your paddling companion hums a song under his breath, a tune as old as the canal. and you begin to feel the rhythm of movement. Paddle, pause, paddle, coast. The raft barely disturbs the water, moving more like a memory than a vehicle. You pass a fellow Chinampero standing knee-deep in his canal, coaxing young reeds into the bank like he's tucking them into bed. He nods at your raft, eyes the flower basket, and raises a thumb. "Orange ones," he calls. "Smart choice." The man with you winks. "She's a midwife, likes the spicy kind." You drift on. A little further along, you pass a rare sight. A chinampa devoted only to flowers. It's smaller, framed with polished wood, and dotted with clay pots balanced on driftwood stands. Hummingbirds dart between petals, and in the center, a small woven bench sits in the shade of a willow. No crops here, just blossoms. You slow as you pass, instinctively quiet. "Ceremonial," your companion whispers. "That plot was for weddings and birth blessings. They say the soil's half lake mud, half ground-up song feathers." You don't ask what that means. You just breathe in the smell. It's impossible to rush here. The water doesn't allow it. The paddle won't hurry. The raft doesn't care if you're late. And neither do the flowers. Your guide stops paddling and lets the raft drift into the shadows of an overhanging fig tree. The branches droop low, and their leaves dance lightly on the surface of the canal. You both lie back, arms behind your heads, as the canopy rustles overhead and a thin stream of sunlight cuts through. "Sometimes," he says, "I just pretend I'm the cargo." You look over. He's grinning. "Deliver me," he says, "to the next dream." You close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a canoe glides past, carrying bundles of garlic and woven fans. A dog barks lazily. A frog belches. And beneath your back, the raft rocks with the tenderness of a cradle that's been practicing for centuries. Historians still argue whether these floating raft journeys were only practical or also meditative. But accounts of flower floaters taking the long route home suggest something deeper, something more like ritual. A pause, a floating breath. The man beside you hums again, barely louder than the wind, and you feel the raft shift direction slightly with the current. You are, for a moment, a passenger. Not in a vehicle, in a floating poem. The basket of marigolds leans gently against your side. Their scent is warm now, touched by sun. You smile and whisper to no one, "Deliver me too." And the water obliges. You don't remember falling asleep on the flower raft, but you must have, because when your eyes open again, the sun is higher, the shadows shorter, and your guide is quietly adjusting the ropes to dock near another chinampa. This one is smaller, but you can feel it even before stepping off. It's breathing. Not in the spooky way. In the earthy, alive, almost sentient way that only well-loved soil can breathe. The air here is thicker, warmer, laced with the scent of tilled mud and something faintly sweet, like rotting lilies maybe, or leftover compost stew. You crouch low and place a palm against the ground. It's warm from the sun, but also dense with moisture. You lift it, and there's a fine smear of dark, sticky muck on your fingers. This is the chinampa skin, and underneath it, its lungs. You see, the secret to the floating farm's power isn't just the structure, it's what the Aztecs understood about how to make the land live. The Chinampa doesn't just sit passively on the lake. It pulls nutrients from it, exhales through its roots, drinks mist and morning fog like tea. And every few weeks, the gardeners come back to feed it. Your raft guide, now turned teacher, gestures toward the shallow canal beside the plot. He grabs a flat-bottomed basket, more like a scoop, and plunges it into the water. With a practiced grunt, he lifts a thick mass of green-black sludge that smells like history's breath. Lake nutrients, he says, smiling. Breakfast for the corn. He walks along the plot's edge, slopping the muck into little hollows around beanstalks and tomato clusters. The soil drinks it eagerly. You can almost hear the roots humming. This isn't fertilizer in the modern sense. It's more like compost tea made fresh, fermented by fish, thickened by algae, and hand-delivered by farmers who know exactly which corner needs an extra ladle. It's personalized mud service. Historians widely agree. This was one of the most advanced and ecologically sustainable nutrient cycling systems in the pre-modern world. The lake fed the crops fed the people, the scraps went back into the lake, and the circle kept spinning, century after squishy century. You walk behind the gardener now, listening to his steps squish softly into the earth. The Chinampa seems to flex underfoot. Not in a way that's dangerous, more like a memory foam mattress. But, made of dirt. He stops beside a cluster of young amaranth, their red stalks shining like wax in the light. Too much water here, he mutters, poking a stick into the soil. Time to breathe. He pulls aside a few rocks and reeds, revealing a tiny drainage path, just wide enough to let excess water leak back into the canal. It trickles out with a whisper, and you swear the amaranth sighs. One fringe tidbit? There were reports, half believed even at the time, of Chinampas that refused to grow certain crops unless the farmer sang to them. Specific songs. One verse too short, and the tomatoes sulked. The story goes that a grandmother once scolded her son-in-law's harvest until he wept, then sang the song correctly, and the peppers forgave him. You're not about to test this theory. But when the wind picks up and rustles through the maize, it does sound like music. The gardener kneels beside a hill of chili plants and points to a tiny pot half buried in the soil. You lean closer. It's filled with what looks like crushed leaves and ash. Dried lake bloom, he explains. Scraped off the sides of our boats. It feeds them faster than sunlight. He's not being poetic. This lake bloom, a mix of algae, moss, and mineral-rich scum, clings to everything, and Aztecs saw no reason to waste it. Scraped, dried, powdered, and spread. Basically lake seasoning for your plants. Historians still debate how intentional this particular practice was. Was it part of a grand agricultural strategy, or just a clever trick that caught on? The records are hazy, the lines between science, spirituality, and intuition beautifully blurred. You help sprinkle a bit more bloom dust over a few new seedlings. The gardener pats the earth gently, like tucking in a child. You step back now, admiring the garden's layout. Long, narrow beds. Strategically placed trees at the corners, usually willows or cypresses, to anchor the raft. Each crop in its own row, but never alone. Corn beside beans. beans beside squash. The legendary three sisters, living and thriving together. This wasn't just efficient, it was intentional. The beans nourished the soil, the corn gave the beans something to climb, and the squash shaded the earth, keeping moisture in and weeds out. Nature's co-op, your stomach rumbles. Apparently, squash also triggers snack thoughts. The gardener laughs and hands you a small gourd filled with something thick and creamy. Ground pumpkin seed, he says, with lime and lake herbs, for strength. You take a sip. It tastes like the lake dreamed of being soup and succeeded. You sit at the edge of the plot again, letting your legs dangle over the side. A frog croaks once, then dives. A heron lifts off from the next Chinampa over, its wings flapping slow and wide. The gardener speaks softly behind you. The Chinampa lives because we remember it. If we forget, it sinks. You think about that, not because it's heavy, but because forgotten things drift. You nod, still chewing lake herb soup, and watch the water ripple gently beneath you. The floating garden breathes in and out. So do you. You stay sitting at the edge of the Chinampa, warm gourd in hand, watching the water idly. It's as calm as a bowl of still tea, with only the occasional plip from a fish who seems to be doing its own morning yoga. Somewhere nearby, someone is yelling in a tone that feels more theatrical than angry. The gardener sighs and grins. Floating plot rivalries, he says. They start early. He gestures down the canal, where two men in adjacent Chinampas are posturing with large ears of corn. One holds his upright like a trophy. The other responds by holding two ears dramatically, as if he's just won a slow-motion produce duel. You watch as a third Chinampero saunters up in a canoe, casually tosses a perfect pumpkin into one man's lap, then paddles away without a word. A chorus of laughter breaks out. Welcome to the not-so-cutthroat world of Chinampa one-upmanship. Historians note that these rivalries were less about animosity and more about playful pride. Each gardener took ownership of his plot's health, its productivity, even its aesthetic. And while there weren't official contests, let's just say if your maize stalks were straighter than your neighbor's, you were going to make sure he noticed. Sometimes, decorations mysteriously appeared on the better plots. Flower garlands wrapped around the trees, painted stones tucked into corners. Other times, friendly mischief crept in. One tale tells of a prankster who, under the moonlight, replanted all his friends' squash rows into the shape of a jaguar footprint. Come morning, the pattern was so perfect, the priest was summoned. He declared it a blessing. The prankster never confessed. You follow the gardener to a raised patch of earth where an odd structure leans. 4 sticks tied into a frame, a kind of measuring cross. He adjusts it, muttering, then nods in satisfaction. Straight rows. That's the secret, he says. Straight rows mean steady hands, and steady hands mean you're not hung over. You raise an eyebrow. Or at least you're good at hiding it. He hands you a reed measuring rod and gestures toward a narrow plot filled with tiny bean seedlings. You try lining it up, gently nudging a few shoots. Your rows look more like a question mark than a crop. Maybe just one drink, you offer. He grins. The competition isn't just visual, though. It's seasonal. Timing is everything. One early bloom, one perfect squash, harvested before your neighbor, and you win a week's worth of bragging rights at the canal-side bartering post. Historians still argue whether these rivalries contributed to increased agricultural yields or were merely social rituals. Did peer pressure push innovation, or was it just a culturally approved outlet for competitive energy? One thing's for sure, everyone took notes. Farmers would paddle through each other's plots, borrowing ideas. A new trellis method? Copied. A floating seedling cradle made from gourds? Imitated within days. There were no patents, only pride and fast paddling. You hear a whistle behind you and turn to see an older Chinampero balancing on his raft with 3 fat ducks waddling behind him. He points at your Chinampa with exaggerated concern, then at his own cornstalks, at least half a head taller. The gardener beside you nods solemnly, then points at a small cluster of ripe tomatoes. The old man shrugs, as if conceding partial defeat. Then one of the ducks tries to eat his paddle. Point. Tomatoes. These floating garden feuds were as much social glue as soil science. Celebrations were often shared. One plot yielded early squash, the next provided flowers for the feast, and someone else brought fermented cactus juice, which may or may not have been the cause of crooked cornrows later. One fringe tidbit? Ducks were sometimes trained to patrol specific Chinampas, honking warnings at strangers or simply gobbling up pests. They weren't always reliable, though, especially if someone bribed them with tamales. Yes, that actually happened. Tamale bribery, ancient and delicious. The sun is beginning to warm your back now. A breeze ripples the water, and the tall reeds at the canal's edge begin to sway, whispering softly. You sit back and admire the garden again. Straight rows, steady roots, ducks on patrol, and gardeners pretending not to notice each other while absolutely noticing each other. And somewhere in all this quiet rivalry, you realize, the competition wasn't about dominance. It was about devotion. A way to say, I care enough to fuss about the soil, about the sun, about the story these plants are telling. Your host pulls up 2 ears of corn and holds them side by side. One is crooked, one is perfect. He hands you the crooked one. This one's sweeter, he says. You believe him. You take a bite, and the flavor is unlike any corn you've tasted. Earthy, tender, just a little smoky. He nods. The crooked ones always try harder. You laugh, mouth full of maize, and the ducks quack in approval. Somewhere, a heron clucks judgment, and the Chinampa, breathing slowly beneath you, tilts ever so slightly to keep you upright. Even in rivalry, it's looking out for you. You finish the last bite of corn just as another canoe glides past, this one piled with what looks like soil. Not baskets, not produce, just giant mounds of damp, glistening, glorious muck. The man paddling it has the stern face of someone who knows he's doing the real work. Your gardener host gives him a solemn nod, like 2 surgeons crossing in a hospital hallway. Mud man, he says reverently. Top tier. You watch as the canoe pulls up to the far side of the Chinampa, and the man begins unloading spadefuls of lakebed sediment with all the ceremony of someone frosting a wedding cake. Each scoop is layered carefully onto the edges of the plot, building it up just a bit more. The shape is precise. The texture? Lumpy perfection. Time for rebanking, your gardener explains. Every few weeks, the lake tries to take her back, so we give her a little reminder who's in charge. This is the secret most people miss. Chinampas are not static. They require maintenance, constant attention, gentle nudges back into balance. The mud man is part farmer, part sculptor, part hydrologist. Historians agree that the cyclical dredging of canal sediment wasn't just about refueling the soil, it also kept the water flowing. Without it, the canals would clog, the gardens would rot, the ducks would get weirdly territorial. Chaos. You crouch beside him now, taking in the smell. It's not unpleasant, like compost crossed with mineral water and something vaguely ancient. You're not sure if it's nostalgia or just duck residue. The mud is scooped up using flat-bottomed baskets made from reed and bark, tied with lake vine. It's back-breaking work, but the man seems to enjoy it. He hums tunelessly, his feet sinking slightly into the edge of the bank as he moves. You give it a try. Your scoop sloshes loudly and immediately tips over, dumping half into your sandal. Acceptable, he says, for a beginner. He shows you the trick. Balance from the knees, tilt with your wrist, aim low, and let gravity do the rest. You try again. This time the mud stays in the scoop. Barely. He gives you a nod of approval so slight it might have been a blink. There's a quiet pride in this act, feeding the land that feeds you. It's not flashy, it's not poetic, but it is eternal. One fringe tidbit: some Chinampas were known by name, passed down through generations like prized heirlooms. Hummingbird nest, turtle belly, sleeping lizard. Each plot had a personality. Some were rumored to prefer certain crops. Others were jealous if a gardener skipped their usual morning greeting. It sounds silly, until you're ankle deep in that warm, breathing soil, realizing this patch of earth has been tended longer than your last 5 relationships combined. And unlike those, this one gives back. Your hands are muddy now, your back slightly sore. You stand to stretch, and nearly topple over as a frog leaps from under your foot with a sound like a surprised hiccup. The gardener chuckles. They like warm toes. You wipe your hands on a nearby reed mat and watch as the mud man finishes his loop around the edge. The bank looks taller now, firmer. The garden feels secure. Historians still argue whether this constant reshaping was a sign of ecological instability or an ingenious way of harmonizing with nature's flow. What's clear is that the Aztecs didn't resist the lake. They danced with it, fed it, borrowed from it, rebuilt around it. This wasn't domination. It was a slow-motion handshake. You help roll one of the empty mud baskets back onto the canoe. The man gives you a half smile and an extra basket to sit on. A soft breeze stirs the water, ruffling the surface like someone gently smoothing a blanket. The mudman pushes off, continuing to the next plot. The canoe dips with his weight but never wobbles. He disappears behind a row of corn. The gardener beside you inhales deeply. Smell that? You do. It's faintly metallic, earthy, alive. That's what breakfast should smell like. You're beginning to understand. It's not about floating farms. Not really. It's about rhythm, tending, letting the lake and the earth meet each other halfway, and giving them a seat at the table. You gaze out across the canals again. The Chinampas stretch in long rows, like emerald piano keys on a watery instrument, each one tuned slightly differently, each one playing its part in a soft, slow song you didn't realize was being sung. You lean back again, hands behind your head, muddy feet dangling off the edge. A duck bobs by. It blinks at you. You blink back. And the Chinampa? She's quiet now. Full. Rebanked. Breathing slow and deep again. Like you. Your feet are dry now, though still caked with a fine crust of lake silt, the kind of dirt that clings like an affectionate dog and refuses to be forgotten. You wiggle your toes, and the mud cracks gently, like old parchment, like a story unfolding underfoot. The gardener offers you a squat ceramic cup filled with something frothy and beige. You eye it cautiously. Pinole, he says, taking a sip of his own. Cornmeal, cacao, a little chili, and a lot of lake gossip. You sip. It's gritty and warm, like drinking history. If history were mildly spicy and a bit grainy, it lingers in your throat like a bedtime story told with a wink. Let's walk, he says. And you do, following him down a reed bridge that connects one Chinampa to the next. The bridge wobbles gently underfoot, but the gardener barely notices. His balance is effortless, like someone who grew up on top of water. On the next floating plot, you see something different. Low wooden racks stretching out across the surface like skinny picnic tables. On top of them, rows of drying herbs, bark shavings, and what might be moss, or might be the lake's idea of a snack tray. Medicine plot, the gardener says. My cousins. This Chinampa isn't about food or flowers. It's about healing. Bundles of herbs tied in careful loops hang from willow branches, and small clay bowls filled with mysterious mixtures sit nestled in the shade. One smells like mint. Another smells like regret. Historians agree that the Aztecs practiced advanced herbal medicine for their time, using hundreds of native plants for everything from fever to toothache to, let's say, love-related dilemmas. Some of those remedies are still studied today. Others have names like deer breath powder, which makes you wonder about the original marketing pitch. You kneel beside a rack of drying petals. These? You ask. Calendula, he replies. Good for burns, and for looking impressive in tea. He's not wrong. Even the medical herbs here look photo-ready. You spot sprigs of epazote, bundles of yarrow, and something ominously labeled Tenochtitlan, which you later learn is a kind of vanilla orchid that doubles as a mild relaxant, and possibly a love potion if the wind is right. One fringe tidbit? A few Chinamperos swore that some medicinal plots whispered when they were ready to harvest. A soft rustling, even on windless days. Scientists call it imagination. Farmers call it experience. You're not here to argue. You pause beside a low altar made of flat stone and driftwood. Upon it sits a bowl of cornmeal, a carved bone flute, and a dried flower wrapped in bark. Offerings, your guide explains. For balance. You take from the garden, you give back. Historians still debate how much of this was spiritual versus practical. Was it animism? Early chemistry? Community theater with incense? No one's quite sure, but everyone agrees it worked. A woman approaches from the far side of the plot, balancing a shallow basket of fresh-cut bark. She's humming, no melody, just a rhythm. The gardener nods toward her. That's who healed my grandfather's knee when it swelled up like a melon. You glance at your own knees, respectfully unimpressive in comparison. She boiled willow bark, crushed ants, added frog saliva, and wrapped it all in maize husk, he continues. He said it stank worse than death and worked better than any priest. You raise your cup. To the frogs. To the frogs, he agrees. You pass a rack of long drying vines, their tendrils curled like sleeping question marks. Laxative, he mutters, not making eye contact. You wisely keep walking. Further on, a narrow corner of the Chinampa is set aside for what appears to be an experiment. Rows of different herbs growing side by side, labeled with painted stones. Some thrive, others sulk. Test plot, he explains. Trying to grow low-light healing herbs for cloudy seasons. We call it Project Hopeful Failure. You chuckle, but there's a seriousness beneath the joke. These floating gardens were places of science as much as spirit. Each seedling was an experiment, each harvest a data point. This wasn't guesswork. It was patient, generational refinement. And here's the most soothing part. Nothing is wasted. The herbs that don't grow? Composted. The bark that molds? Turned into mulch. Even failed medicines might get burned as incense, maybe to keep mosquitoes away, or maybe just to say, nice try anyway. You help carry a tray of dried flowers to a canoe docked at the edge. It rocks slightly as you place the bundle aboard. The woman pats your shoulder, or, "You have good plant energy," she says, "and also a leaf in your hair." You pluck it out, sheepish. The sun is high now, shadows crisp. The canals shimmer like silk ribbons pulled through sunlight. You sit beside the altar once more, pinole in hand, the scent of dried calendula swirling around you. Somewhere nearby, a duck sneezes, balance restored. The Chinampa exhales. So do you. The medicine Chinampa fades behind you as the gardener leads the way along a narrow strip of floating land, so thin it feels like you're walking a green tightrope across the lake. Every step is soft, the earth beneath your feet yielding just enough to remind you, this place floats, not metaphorically, not in a dreamy, poetic way, but actually floats. You pass another raft moored to a pole, this one loaded with woven baskets filled to the brim with bugs? Compost drop-off, your guide says, hopping easily aboard. Or, as we like to call it, gourmet leftovers for the worms. The baskets brim with everything from fish bones and vegetable peels to flower stems and cracked maize husks. A few crickets hop out as if late for work. The smell is surprisingly pleasant, like the forest after a rain. A little sweet, a little tangy, and entirely alive. This, he says, holding up a dripping ladle of the squishiest mixture you've ever seen, is breakfast for soil. He sloshes it into a shallow pit at the edge of the Chinampa. Immediately, a wave of tiny insects skitters across the surface, followed by a bird swooping down for an early snack. You're witnessing a buffet in 5 dimensions, he says, proud. Historians often overlook this part. The insects, the birds, the frogs, the microlife. But this ecosystem was not just about plants. It was a carefully tuned biological orchestra, with everything from duckweed to dragonflies playing a part. And then there are the worms. Oh, the worms.
You kneel beside a shaded compost trench where the soil is heaving ever so slightly. Your guide scoops a handful and lets it crumble through his fingers like black silk. "This is Chinampa gold," he whispers, as if speaking too loudly might scare the nutrients away. One fringe tidbit. Some Chinamperos named their worms, not just affectionately, formally. They believed specific worms had specific temperaments. One famous gardener swore his worm Maxtla preferred pumpkin stems and worked faster when sung to. You suspect the worm didn't care, but hey, whatever cultivates joy. You try holding a handful of the compost yourself. It's warm. It wriggles. It smells like health and potential, and Tuesday morning in the best possible way. The gardener smiles. Good, right? Better than perfume. You're not ready to confirm that. Next, he leads you to a curious-looking device, a slanted wooden platform covered in thin reeds, placed over a slow trickle of water.
Worm tea brewer, he says proudly. You wait for the punchline. There isn't one. They actually steep compost through filtered water and use it as a nutrient spray. It's like herbal tea. For corn. He hands you a reed scoop. Want to sprinkle some blessings? You ladle the earthy tea over a row of young chilies. The soil absorbs it greedily, as if saying, "Finally. Thank you." There's something deeply soothing about this entire ritual. Not just the composting, not just the worms or the teas, but the rhythm, the pause, the knowing that nothing goes to waste, not even failure. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system was the most sustainable pre-modern agricultural practice or simply the best documented. But even skeptics admit the closed-loop design is brilliant. Food waste becomes fuel, water is reused, soil is never left hungry. The lake is partner, not obstacle. You sit back on your heels, watching the worms do their slow, heroic work, and wonder how many generations have knelt right here, hands in soil, hoping for a better harvest. A heron lands nearby and watches you with faint judgment. You wave. It blinks. Approvingly? Who knows? Your gardener companion now walks to a small, square plot tucked away in the shade. It's ringed with stones and overhung with a net. Inside, mushrooms. Dozens of them, in neat little clusters, their caps dewy and delicate. Mushrooms don't like drama, he says, ducking under the netting. No wind, no loud frogs, and definitely no early harvesting. You join him, stepping softly. The air here is cooler, a little damper. The ground squishes more, like pudding that's read too many philosophy books. These aren't just any mushrooms. Some are medicinal, some culinary, some experimental. And one is the infamous laughing mooncap, which is definitely not for lunch. At least not your lunch. The Aztecs respected fungi, revered them, used them in healing, in rituals, in ceremonies too sacred to be discussed casually over pinole. You watch as he uses a carved shell to gently nudge a mushroom loose, turning it delicately in the light. "This one's ready," he whispers. "But only this one." You nod, as if the mushroom had a say in the matter. Maybe it did. You walk back across the Chinampa toward the raft, and as you go, the compost steam rises in lazy curls, the worms settle deeper into their trench, and the birds begin their mid-morning commentary again. Mostly positive reviews, you suspect. And in your pocket, you find a single calendula petal stuck to your palm. You keep it there. The Chinampa breathes out again, soft and low, like a tired storyteller taking a tea break. You don't even realize how much the lake has changed around you until you glance up. The water's gone from a flat morning silver to something darker, greener, dappled now with floating lily pads and patches of duckweed that shimmer in the breeze like confetti left behind by an ancient festival. The raft you're on glides quietly toward a new Chinampa. This one isn't a garden or a medicine patch. It's something different. Welcome to the tree nursery, your gardener guide says, stretching his arms out wide. You step ashore and immediately feel it. The coolness, the gentle hush. It's a shaded world, more vertical than the others, as if someone decided the Chinampa needed to reach up for a change. Rows of young trees line the edges, staked with reeds and woven rope. Some are fruiting, tiny guavas, baby avocados, a few papayas still blushing into ripeness. Others are ornamental, planted for their shade, their wood, or their mood-enhancing foliage, apparently. You spot one sapling with deep purple leaves and a nameplate, Tlil mood regulator. You cock an eyebrow. Your guide shrugs. My cousin made that one up, but we're all feeling calmer, so maybe she's onto something. You wander between the rows, admiring how the trees are arranged, not just by type, but by temperament. The avocados get more sunlight. The willows stick together like shy siblings. A few cypresses seem to lean slightly away from the papayas, as if there was some unresolved sap drama. Historians agree that tree management on Chinampas was crucial. These weren't just pretty add-ons, they anchored the islands. Their roots wove through the structure, binding the mud, reeds, and wood into something cohesive, something that wouldn't wash away with the first strong rain. But this wasn't engineering in the modern, ruler and blueprint sense. It was relational. The farmers knew which trees liked which soil, which ones cooperated with beans, which ones gave too much shade or too little. Every branch was part of the community. You pause beside a squat tree with feathery leaves and a bright yellow fruit dangling like a sleepy lantern. Tejocote, your guide says, makes good syrup, or good lies, depending who you ask. One fringe tidbit. Some Aztec songs described trees as keepers of secrets. It was believed that certain saplings would only grow well if planted with a whispered wish. A few gardeners even sang lullabies to their younger trees, sometimes in Nahuatl, sometimes just humming made-up tunes with all the sincerity of a bedtime prayer. You crouch beside one such sapling now. It's barely taller than your knee, its leaves trembling faintly in the breeze. You feel the sudden urge to whisper something. Not a wish, exactly. Just a greeting. A moment of stillness. Hey there, you say softly. The tree doesn't reply, but it also doesn't fall over. You call that a win. Your gardener friend taps a basket hanging from one of the cypress limbs. Inside are shallow clay cups filled with what looks like sap. Tree nectar, he says. Only take one. It's politely borrowed. You take a sip. It's sweet, woody, with a floral aftertaste that makes your eyebrows lift and your brain go very quiet for a moment. Right? He grins. Nature's sleepy time tea. You drift through the orchard slowly, stepping over winding roots and low-hanging branches. The light filters through the canopy in lazy beams, striping your arms and cheeks like you're being painted into the scene. One particularly crooked tree leans so far over the path that you duck under it and find a small stone shrine hidden in the roots. It's simple. 3 river rocks stacked, a feather tucked into the base, and a dried flower, wilted but somehow still upright. "What's this one?" you ask. "Old tree wishes," your guide replies. "We don't disturb them." You nod. You don't want to. Historians still argue whether such shrines were spiritual, personal, or simply decorative. Some suggest they were markers for specific planting rituals. Others say they were informal offerings, whispers left behind in case the tree had ears. You keep walking, slower now. The raft waits at the far end, gently knocking against the Chinampas' edge like a dog with a stick and no thumbs. As you step back on, the trees rustle softly behind you, like applause at a lullaby concert. You look over your shoulder. The saplings sway, the fruits dangle, and a breeze stirs the leaves in a pattern that almost sounds like a sigh. And just like that, the tree island is behind you. But some part of it, cool shade, sticky nectar, feathered roots, sticks to you. Not literally. Well, okay, maybe a little literally. You find a leaf in your pocket later. No idea how it got there. The Chinampa drifts on. You lean back into the curve of the raft, the tree island shrinking behind you like a memory dissolving in tea. A dragonfly skims across the surface of the canal, wobbling left, then right, then disappearing into the reeds as if it had somewhere very important to be, and zero intention of explaining. Your guide stretches, bones cracking like twigs. "Time for trade," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "We're not bringing much." He taps the side of the raft, revealing a low compartment filled with bundles, herbs, flower garlands, a string of dried chili pods that looks suspiciously like a festive necklace for a lizard. Apparently, you've been riding on a floating farmer's market all along. As you paddle toward a wider stretch in the canal, the hush of the water is replaced by a low buzz. Voices, laughter, snatches of barter song. Ahead, several rafts are moored side by side, their chinamperos standing proudly beside their wares. It's not quite a marketplace, more like a floating gathering, less yelling, more nodding. One man holds up a gourd of honey, tilts it slightly toward a woman balancing a tray of eggs. She considers, narrows her eyes, and counters with a handful of tiny fish wrapped in corn husk. No words, just gestures. "Welcome," your guide whispers, "to the quietest commerce in Mesoamerica." Historians often describe Aztec marketplaces as bustling, loud, crowded. But here on the Chinampas, it's different. This is canal culture. Low tones, fewer coins, more trade. And absolutely no shouting. You suspect a duck would be kicked out for quacking too aggressively. You pass a vendor offering water lilies. Yes, actual flowers as currency. Another man displays polished stones, each carved with a symbol. One resembles a frog. One looks like a very sleepy sun. You're tempted. Good for bartering, your guide says, or confusing archaeologists. You hand over a garland in exchange for a reed fan shaped like a jaguar. It's completely impractical. You love it. One fringe tidbit. Some Chinamperos created their own trading signatures, not formal glyphs, but unique arrangements of goods laid out in specific patterns. A spiral of corn kernels meant open to all offers. A triangle of dried herbs signaled only trading for fish. It was like emoji-based Craigslist with more frogs. You approach a canoe laden with obsidian tools, small knives, scraping stones, beads polished so smooth they shimmer in the sun. A woman behind the display sits cross-legged, weaving fibers into rope with the kind of speed that makes your thumbs feel embarrassed. You offer your chili garland. She accepts, hands you a bead bracelet. No refunds, she says, deadpan. You laugh. Historians still argue whether these informal raft markets were extensions of larger urban systems or completely independent economies. The truth is likely both. The Chinampa world had its own rhythms, slower, more relational, with trust cultivated like squash blossoms. You settle near a group of farmers sipping something thick and green from shared cups. Your guide introduces you, just a nod, no names, and passes the drink. You sip. It's bitter, herbal, and slightly fizzy. Your eyebrows attempt escape. Ah, says one farmer, you've met pulque. Pulque, the Aztec fermented beverage of choice, made from the sap of the maguey plant. Slightly alcoholic, but more importantly, communal. You take another sip. It tastes like wet cactus in polite rebellion. Someone starts playing a small drum. Another taps rhythmically on a hollowed gourd. The music is soft, hypnotic. You find yourself swaying slightly, as if the raft and your head are now conspiring to lull you into a nap. A duck waddles onto the corner of your raft, surveys the scene, then pecks at a dropped corn kernel before strutting off with the air of someone who's tasted better. Don't mind him, says the drummer. He's a snob. The afternoon stretches. The sky ripples with heat haze. You lie back on the raft, clutching your bead bracelet and jaguar fan like souvenirs from a dream you're still inside of. Overhead, a heron glides silently by, its wings slicing through the sky like lazy scissors. One vendor starts singing, a low tune, wordless, almost a hum. It rises like steam, gentle and aimless. And you realize, this floating market isn't about efficiency. It's about presence, about being exactly here, exactly now, in the slow rhythm of trade and tide. You trade nothing else that day. You just watch, listen, float. The Chinampa doesn't ask for more. You awake from a soft doze to find your guide poking at the side of the raft with a long pole. We're off to feed the lake, he says, as if that's the most natural thing to say after a nap beside a singing onion vendor. The pole catches on something beneath the surface, a tether maybe, and the raft eases back into motion. You drift through a narrower canal now, the floating market falling behind like a happy blur of laughter, barter, and mildly judgmental birds. The water darkens slightly here, tinged with the green of algae and flecks of pollen. Dragonflies buzz past like curious thoughts. Then you see them. Tiny islands, smaller than Chinampas. No crops, no trees. Just compost. These, says your guide, are the feeders. You glance down at the nearest one. It's a tangle of roots, reeds, and muck, like a floating lasagna of rot. It smells exactly how it looks, but in a way that feels oddly comforting, like mulch on a forest floor or forgotten laundry on a warm spring day. We pile fish bones, dead plants, sometimes a broken sandal, he says. The lake eats it. Then she gives back. Historians agree that the Aztecs maintained these nurture rafts to replenish the lake's nutrient cycle. But the practice wasn't just scientific, it was respectful, a ritual offering of decay, so the living might thrive. One fringe tidbit? Some Chinamperos claimed the feeders had moods. On certain days, they'd sink slightly, as if full. On others, they'd float higher, hungry. Superstition? Probably. But you eye the nearest raft just in case. The guide leans out, tossing a bundle of shredded maize leaves onto one of the feeders. It splashes gently. A school of tiny fish darts through, nibbling at the debris. You catch sight of a salamander, long, pale, smiling. An axolotl, a creature that never ages. It blinks at you. You blink back. Don't tell him your secrets, the guide warns. He's got a big mouth. You smile. The axolotl disappears into the shadows. You float farther, deeper into this tangled green corridor, past lily pads and crooked tree branches that hang low enough to brush your shoulders. The raft scrapes lightly against something, an old submerged log maybe, but keeps moving, lazy as a yawn. Suddenly your guide stops paddling. Your guide. Listen. You do. Silence. And then a plunk, a splash, a gentle glug-glug, like someone pouring syrup into a basin. You realize the Chinampa is drinking, or the lake is exhaling. Either way, you've entered the quiet zone. The guide nods toward a half-sunken platform, lashed with vines and covered in reeds. That one used to be my grandfather's, he says softly. Grew the best chilies in the valley. You float past it slowly. The raft is half collapsed, the soil overgrown with wild grass and forget-me-nots. But the shape is still there. The bones of a floating garden. Sleeping, not gone. Every so often, he adds, the lake gives us one back, pushes it to the surface, like a memory. Historians still argue whether this is simply natural buoyancy or something more mysterious. But to the Chinamperos, these moments are sacred, a reminder that nothing is truly lost, just waiting to float again. You help your guide toss another offering onto a feeder raft. Banana peels this time, with a cracked clay bowl tucked in like a farewell gift. A breeze stirs. The leaves tremble. The feeders bob slightly, satisfied. And somehow you feel lighter. As you begin to head back through the canal, your guide hands you something wrapped in corn husk. You unwrap it carefully. Inside is a tamale, still warm, filled with squash and beans and something spicy enough to raise an eyebrow. Trade secret, he says, grinning. Grown on a plot that listens to jokes. You take a bite, It's smoky, savory, and faintly nutty, like the Chinampa cooked it herself. The sky above you is turning golden now. Shadows stretch long over the water. The ducks quiet down. Even the frogs seem thoughtful. You lean back once more, tamale in hand, and watch as a feeder raft drifts slightly out of place before a vine tugs it back into line. Balance. Always balance. The Chinampa world isn't symmetrical. It isn't clean, but it knows how to hold itself together. By sinking, by feeding, by remembering. And as the last feeder disappears into the reeds behind you, you realize you're not just visiting a floating farm. You're visiting a floating memory, and it remembers you too. The light now comes in sideways, spilling across the canal in golden lines so soft they could be mistaken for spider silk. You paddle slowly, the water barely disturbed, ripples folding back on themselves like pages turning lazily in a half-read book. Your guide hums something tuneless. Not a song exactly, but a pattern. You realize it matches the dip and drag of his paddle. Rhythm matters here. Everything is rhythm. Sun's got about 3 naps left in it, he says. Just enough time for a day. You don't question the math. As your raft drifts toward another Chinampa, you notice this one is set up differently, less cultivated, more lived in. A hammock swings gently between 2 young willows. A clay mug sits on a stump, half filled with something thick and greenish that you're in no rush to identify. And near the center of the plot is a small fire pit ringed with obsidian chips, like a campsite for very stylish raccoons. This is my place, your guide announces. Well, one of them. I rotate. You step off the raft. The earth here is springy, like walking on a mattress that knows too much. The air smells like burnt wood, basil, and someone's forgotten tortilla. Your guide plucks a squash blossom from a trellis and eats it whole. Want a tour? You nod. He points toward a stack of flat stones, each one painted with a tiny glyph. Schedule, he explains. Monday's beans, Tuesday's corn, Wednesday is naps. You approve. Historians often describe Aztec farming as rigid, militarized, structured to the point of exhaustion. But here in the Chinampas, there's room for drift. For naps measured not by the sun, but by the warmth of your hammock. For work done when the soil hums back at you, not when a calendar shouts. One fringe tidbit. Some Chinamperos claim to time their planting by ear, literally listening to the ground. A low crackle? Time to sow seeds. A soft hiss? Wait for rain. And once, famously, a farmer delayed planting an entire season because his plot smelled suspicious. You sit beside the fire pit, where a few coals still glow. Your guide pulls a flat rock over and opens a small pouch tied to his belt. Out come corn kernels, a dried pepper, a shard of cacao, and a pinch of what looks like moss. Lunch, he says. You expect him to cook it. Instead, he arranges it on the stone in a tiny mandala, then gestures at it. You wait. He shrugs. Just looking at it helps. And it does. Later, you lie in the hammock, which sways with the breeze and the occasional firm nudge from a nearby willow. Your eyes close. The sun warms your cheeks. Somewhere nearby, a duck murmurs disapproval at a fish. You drift. You wake to the smell of tortillas. Evening snack, your guide announces, handing you one folded around squash and black beans. It's simple, warm, perfect. You eat while watching the Chinampas' shadows lengthen, stretching into the canal like curious fingers. Historians still argue whether Chinamperos really lived full-time on their plots or rotated between them. But one thing's clear, these floating gardens weren't just fields. They were homes, temples, dreaming platforms, places where time slowed and soil listened. You help sweep the garden paths with a reed broom. You refill the compost bucket. You whisper thanks to the squash for existing. No one says this is necessary, but it feels wrong not to. The guide hands you a gourd cup of something called cacao atole. It's warm, thick, slightly bitter, and tastes like melted history. Careful, he warns. You'll sleep for a week. You don't doubt him. The sun finally dips low, catching the Chinampa in golden fire. Everything glows. The hammock, the squash blossoms. Even the coals in the fire pit wink back at the stars just beginning to appear. And for one moment, as the wind rustles through the trees, you feel it. This plot is alive. Not metaphorically, but really. Breathing, remembering, growing. You lean back. The Chinampa shifts beneath you, gently, firmly, like a mother rocking a child who's almost, but not quite, asleep. You let it. You don't remember falling asleep, which is how you know it was a good one. When your eyes open again, it's to the soft slosh of paddles and a chorus of distant frogs, each seemingly trying to out-croak the others with sleepy bravado. The sun is gone. In its place, the softest navy sky, dusted with stars. Your guide hands you a cloak. It gets poetic out here at night, he says. The raft drifts toward another cluster of Chinampas, these ones dimly lit with tiny clay lanterns. They glow orange like fireflies trapped mid-story. You pass one plot where someone is still working, hunched over under a reed lamp, gently adjusting a row of bean vines as if tucking in children for bed. But tonight's destination is different. Not for planting, not for selling, not even for hammocks. It's for listening. Your guide gestures for silence, not the strict kind, the reverent kind, and pulls the raft along a winding waterway, flanked by Chinampas that seem, in the moonlight, not quite real. Their edges blur into the lake. Their shadows stretch toward each other like old friends meeting across time. And then you hear it. Not frogs, not birds, but something else. Whispers. You hold your breath. They're farming by moon, your guide says quietly. Or dreaming out loud. You don't question the logic. Some Chinamperos believed that nighttime was when the lake spoke, that certain crops, especially herbs, listened better after dusk. Some even claimed their squash grew sweeter when planted to the rhythm of owl calls. Tonight, you get to test that theory. You step off the raft and follow your guide down a Chinampa path lit by bioluminescent mushrooms. Yes, that's a thing here, glowing softly along the borders like stage lights set to whimsy. A woman waits in the center of the plot. She wears a shawl that glints like it's woven from fish scales and thyme. She nods, hands you a bundle of seeds wrapped in corn husk, motions to the soil. You kneel, you plant. Each seed sinks into the warm, moon-dampened earth like it's slipping into a bedtime story. No words are spoken. The wind, if it could be called that, is more of a suggestion, ruffling the tops of nearby plants, playing a private melody only they seem to understand. Historians still argue whether moon farming was practical or purely ceremonial, but records mention it enough to suggest something more than superstition. The Aztecs tracked celestial cycles obsessively, planting, harvesting, even weeding, mapped against lunar rhythms. One fringe tidbit? A few Chinamperos swore that speaking during moon sowing scared the seeds. "They're shy," one farmer wrote in an almost poem scratched onto agave bark. "Let them sleep into growing." You sit in stillness after planting, watching the woman press her fingers into the soil beside yours. She smiles, not at you, at the earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots once, twice. Your guide whispers, "Time to go." You stand slowly. The Chinampa doesn't protest, but you get the sense it noticed your presence. Filed it away under soft-footed visitor or gentle thumb. Back on the raft, the woman waves. Her shawl catches the lantern light and flashes green-blue like a sleeping fish. Then she turns back to the plot, kneels, and disappears into stillness. The ride back is even quieter. You pass a chinampa with tiny bells tied to its corn stalks. The breeze nudges them into a melody that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. Another plot is filled entirely with night-blooming flowers, white and violet petals curling open, reaching toward the stars like hands in prayer. You drift past a canoe where two gardeners lie side by side, pointing at constellations, occasionally arguing over whether that dot is a rabbit or just a smudge. The raft glides on. You begin to notice the sounds more sharply, the rhythmic slosh of water, the far-off flap of a bird's wings, the squeak of a frog adjusting its expectations. You lean your head against the side of the raft. The wood is cool. The lake hums. Somewhere beneath you, fish sleep. Somewhere above, a comet arcs quietly across the sky. Just for you, maybe. Or just because it was scheduled to. The Chinampa world doesn't shout. It whispers. And tonight, it whispers your name in a voice made of reeds, water, and moonlight. The sky has gone indigo, stitched with stars so clear they look hand-placed. Your raft coasts through a bend in the canal where Chinampas lean closer to the water, their trees bowing like old dancers mid-curtsy. You pass a raft tied to one of the banks, empty, but still rocking gently, as if someone just stepped off and vanished into mist. "Stay alert," your guide whispers. "This is where the land moves." You're pretty sure that's not what you wanted to hear at this hour, but curiosity's already got you. The raft slows. Ahead, a plot of floating farmland. Except, it's not moored. The entire Chinampa is drifting, unanchored, slowly turning as if pirouetting for no one. You squint. Crops still grow in neat rows. A scarecrow tilts in the corner, its arms out as if bracing for balance. But the whole structure just floats, a little too free. "Someone cut it loose," your guide mutters. "Or maybe it cut itself loose." You blink. Wait, Chinampas can escape? He shrugs. Depends who you ask. Historians still argue whether Chinampa theft was a real problem or just an overblown lakeside legend. But a few records mention wandering plots, gardens that drifted away during storms or mysteriously detached themselves overnight. Some claim it was sabotage, others, mischief. Either way, it happened. One fringe tidbit. A 15th century lake census, yes, that was a thing, recorded 3 ghost plots no one could account for, floating too far to reclaim and left to drift into legend. One, supposedly, grew the spiciest chilies ever tasted, but no one could ever find it again. Your guide pulls you closer. You can always tell a stolen one, he says. Too neat, no personality. The raft spins slightly, revealing rows of unnaturally symmetrical corn, perfectly spaced beans, and a disturbingly spotless squash patch. You nod. Looks suspicious. He taps the soil with his paddle. No frog footprints. You didn't know frog prints were a measure of legitimacy, but here we are. You drift silently past the rogue plot. The moon catches its corner, and for a moment you swear the scarecrow blinks. But maybe it was just the wind. Stealing a chinampa, your guide says as the water resumes its rhythm, is a slow crime. Takes hours. But no one notices till their tomatoes start showing up at someone else's festival booth. Apparently, there was even a phrase for it. Teotl Chinampayo, or blessed drifter. Part insult, part compliment. The victim would often try to reclaim the garden, but unless you had frog witnesses or a chili plant that could identify you in a lineup, it was hard to prove. You round a bend and spot another raft ahead, this one being guided home by a farmer with 2 small kids asleep under a blanket of leaves. The raft bumps the shore gently, and the farmer ties it with a knot so practiced it looks like muscle memory. Some folks anchor with rope, your guide says. Others just plant deep enough roots. You let that one sit. The raft passes through a narrower canal, where wild Chinampas, overgrown and unclaimed, lean into the path like half-remembered dreams. Some still bear fruit. Others seem to be holding on to stories instead. You see a chinampa covered in marigolds, another bursting with green onions, and one where the only crop appears to be moss. Thick, luxurious, glowing faintly in the starlight, like the underside of a sleeping dragon. You glide past a sign nailed to a tree trunk. This is not your garden, unless it is. It's hard to argue with that. The drifting plot reappears in the distance behind you, still turning, still tending its impossible neatness. You feel a little sad for it. Too perfect to belong, too tidy to be trusted. You want a real chinampa? Your guide says, kicking his heel against the raft. You need chaos, ducks, dirt under the fingernails, a rogue chili or two. You nod, deeply. The raft drifts back into wider water. The stars above seem to shift with you, and in the quiet you realize, even floating worlds need boundaries. Even fertile dreams need to be tied to something real. The air has cooled, but it's the cozy kind of cool. The kind that invites cloaks, not complaints. The stars above gleam harder now, the Milky Way stretching like a dust trail behind some invisible, sleepy god. Your raft cuts through a mirror of all that. Sky above, sky below. You're not sure where one ends and the other begins. Your guide breaks the silence by tapping a small drum hanging from his hip. Want to meet the compost choir? You blink. I think I do. He grins, turns the raft into a tight bend, and you're suddenly surrounded by sound. Soft, low tones echoing through the night like monks humming under blankets. But there are no monks here, just gardens. And one peculiar chinampa. It's shaped like a spiral. Layers of beds curl inward toward a glowing center. A fire pit or lantern, maybe. Or a mushroom that believes in performance art. Each level of the spiral holds different compost stages, from raw vegetable peelings to dark, crumbly earth so rich it looks edible. Don't. At the center, seated in a lotus position on a reed mat, is an old man with long braids and a woven belt that jingles every time he moves. He's not meditating. He's listening. He lifts a hand as you approach, not to wave, but to quiet the frogs. Too chatty, he mutters. You stifle a laugh. Every compost has its voice, your guide says, and his job is to listen for when it's ready. You're not sure if this is metaphor or reality anymore, possibly both. Historians still argue whether compost in the Chinampa system was rotated methodically or intuitively. Some ancient records suggest formulas, X number of days per layer, with fish guts added precisely at dusk. Others describe it as a conversation between gardener and decay. One fringe tidbit? Some Chinamperos claimed you could tell compost readiness by smell alone, but only if you'd fasted that day. Hunger sharpens the nose, one elderly farmer insisted, and weeds out the liars. You step onto the spiral Chinampa carefully. The ground feels warm underfoot. The compost beds are lush and organized like song verses, fresh scraps at the edge, crumbly humus near the middle, and in between, a layer that smells faintly of wet laughter. Don't ask. At each bed, the old man hums, shifts his head, adjusts the compost slightly. He doesn't speak, but he nods at you, as if to say, yes, you may visit. Just don't mess with the banana peels. Your guide kneels beside one of the upper beds and sprinkles something over the top. You look closer. It's powdered charcoal, mixed with crushed eggshells. Treats, he says. Keeps the mix entertained. You walk the spiral slowly. At one turn, you spot a clay pot filled with flower petals. Another holds fish scales, glittering like pocket-sized moon fragments. Yet another contains feathers? Every offering tells a story, your guide explains. This one's from a duck who gave his last opinion too loudly. You glance around. No ducks in sight. Probably for the best. The smell is earthy, but not foul. More like the promise of life. Something between fresh soil, sun-warmed bark, and ancient secrets, no longer whispered. You breathe it in. It feels oddly grounding. At the center of the spiral, the old man hums louder. He presses a finger into the deepest compost, holds it to his nose, and breaks into a satisfied smile. Ready, he says. The guide claps once. The sound echoes like a bell across the canal. From the shadows, other rafts appear. Gardeners, quiet ones, each with baskets of seedlings, tiny plants wrapped in damp cloth, leaves twitching like they've been holding their breath. One by one, they step onto the chinampa and scoop the dark compost into their baskets, whispering thanks or maybe recipes as they do. The energy is reverent, joyful, but quiet. You watch a young girl with an onion sprout smile so wide it might outshine the moon. She tucks the compost around its base like she's tucking it into bed. Best soil on the lake, someone whispers, grown on gossip and fish bones. You grin. Historians rarely mention this kind of moment. Most records talk about food production, logistics, imperial quotas. But here in the compost spiral, it's something else entirely. Ritual, rebirth, a kind of weird, beautiful alchemy. Your guide offers you a handful of the ready compost. It's warm, smells like every garden you've ever dreamed of. You pack it gently around a seedling, not even knowing what kind of plant it is. Doesn't matter. You've added your part to the lake now. As the rafts drift away, you glance back at the spiral. The old man gives you a wink, then closes his eyes. Listening again. Always listening. You sit quietly on the raft now, hands still dusted with rich soil, watching the Chinampa spiral recede into the dark. The last of the compost gatherers are vanishing one by one into the canal maze, their little rafts lit with single lanterns like sleepy fireflies headed home. The lake hums again, not loudly, just enough to make your bones vibrate the way a cello string might after being plucked by a thoughtful ghost. Let's go meet the seeds, your guide says, as if this is a normal evening plan and not a line from a dream. You paddle through a shallow stretch of canal where the water laps against tufts of reeds, and here the Chinampas are smaller. Some are no bigger than picnic tables. Nursery beds, he explains. Kindergarten for crops. You pull up beside one, its soil loose, damp, and filled with sprouting green fuzz that looks like someone tried to grow hope in a hurry. Tiny cornstalks peek out from beneath a lattice of shade leaves. Baby tomato plants stretch in slow-motion yoga. A single bean plant curls toward the moon like it's flirting. Each nursery plot has its own personality. One is framed by little carved sticks, each with a different face. Happy, sleepy, grumpy, you name it. Another has a ring of smooth stones painted in white with glyphs that may or may not spell out plant lullabies. Some chinamperos swear seedlings grow better if you whisper compliments, your guide says, crouching to murmur something encouraging to a pepper sprout. Others think it's the shade, or the frog pea. You wisely nod at all three possibilities. Historians still debate whether the Chinampa seedling beds were used uniformly across regions, or if every community had its own quirks. Evidence points to both. Some practices standardized, others wildly individualized, like one nursery found with bird feathers planted in rows for courage. One fringe tidbit? A few farmers insisted that their best harvests came from seedlings that had heard music. Drums, flutes, even the low drone of conch shells. One farmer even invented a plant concert, where different crops were sung to nightly in rotating shifts. His neighbors thought he was mad. His tomatoes? Legendary. You kneel beside a sprout that hasn't quite made up its mind whether to be a squash or a metaphor. You offer a gentle compliment. Nice roots. It quivers slightly. You're going to call that a win. The nursery keeper, a woman with hands like braided bark, offers you a handful of seeds in a little cloth pouch. They're warm from her pocket. Plant them in your dreams, she says with a smile. Water them with naps. You don't know how seriously to take that until she pats her own forehead and adds, "The best Chinampas are built in here first." She points to her temple, or possibly your future. You nod deeply. You walk slowly among the nursery plots, noticing how each one is marked, not just by sticks or stones, but by personality. One is clearly run by a jokester. Its sprouts wear tiny reed hats. Another plot has a feathered serpent drawn in the dirt between the rows, as if to guard against aphids or bad attitudes. Your guide crouches beside a bed of young amaranth. "This one's for color," he says. "Tastes like green lightning. Looks like joy." You brush your fingers gently across the leaves. They tickle. He explains that these nursery plots are rotated frequently, often allowed to sleep between cycles. The soil is removed, relayered, sometimes sung to. "Can't just use the ground," he says. "You have to let it recover, like a friend who's helped you move furniture." You remember how many ancient systems took from the earth without pause. But here, even the seedlings are asked how they're feeling. You pass a small pond beside one nursery, its surface lit by moonlight and dotted with floating reed bundles. "What are those?" you ask. "Cradle rafts," he replies, "where seeds learn to float before they root." You're not entirely sure if that's literal or a metaphor for growing up. Probably both. You sit by the pond a while, listening to the chirp of insects and the slow, deep breath of the lake. One sprout near your foot leans toward you, as if in approval. You resist the urge to name it, for now. The nursery keeper lights a small cone of dried herbs, and the smoke curls upward, smelling of sweet grass and damp mornings. You watch the seedlings sway slightly in the wind, and it hits you. They don't just grow food here, they grow futures. And the futures are quiet, green, and unapologetically weird. Just like this place. Just like tonight. Your raft now feels like an old friend, a creaky, moss-dusted companion that knows how to glide without asking questions. The stars above reflect so crisply on the water that when a duck glides across the surface, it looks like it's paddling through the night sky itself. You and your guide move deeper into the Chinampa network, where fewer lanterns shine and the canals narrow into whisper paths. The air smells of wet reeds, smoke, and that unnameable something that means midnight. He steers toward a plot entirely different from the rest. No crops, no compost, no hammock strung between trees. Just a square of water lilies and a half-submerged wooden frame. "This one's for remembering," he says softly. You blink. Remembering what? He doesn't answer. Instead, he steps off the raft and onto the edge of the frame, which rocks once, twice, and then stills. You follow. The platform isn't built for growing. It's built for floating. Slightly sunken, lined with flowers and small, flat stones arranged in quiet spirals. Some have faces drawn on them. Others bear single glyphs or the occasional smiley frog. "These are memory plots," he finally says. "Every Chinampero builds one eventually, for the people, or the plants, or just the moments." You take a seat beside a carved frog stone. Historians still argue how widespread these memory plots were. Few written records remain, and the practice doesn't show up in the imperial documents. But oral traditions persist. Many say Chinamperos created these to honor not just the dead, but also the seasons, the rains, the favorite cornstalk that bent like a question mark and made everyone laugh. One fringe tidbit: some claimed that singing to a memory plot during new moons could bring back a forgotten recipe or the smell of your grandmother's tamales. Others said you had to leave behind something you didn't want to forget, like the last kernel from a good harvest, or a dream you couldn't make sense of. Your guide reaches into his cloak and pulls out a smooth red stone. He places it gently at the center of a spiral. "For my uncle," he says. "He once convinced a chili plant to stop biting." You don't ask. Instead, you reach for a small reed nearby and twist it into a circle. Rough, a bit lopsided. But it's yours. You place it beside a stone that has a faint smile carved into it. Maybe it was someone's grandpa. Maybe it's the plot itself, grinning back at you. "You'll come back here," your guide says, not as a question. Or maybe you won't, but it'll remember you. You let that sink in. A warm wind passes through the lilies. Somewhere nearby, water splashes, soft and slow, like someone stirring a giant cup of tea. You lie down on the platform. It creaks slightly, but holds. Above you, the stars continue their slow spin. You feel the memory plot move, not fast, not noticeably, just a gentle drift, as if nudging itself back into place after someone thought too hard. There are no words carved here, no labels, just shapes, offerings, presents. It's like a scrapbook made by a lake. Your guide murmurs something too low to hear, a story maybe, or a recipe. You close your eyes just for a moment. You see flashes, images not entirely your own. A woman laughing over a spilled pot of beans, a child tucking squash blossoms under their hat, someone arguing with a tomato plant and losing. You open your eyes, still on the platform, still floating, still remembered. The raft bumps softly against the edge of the plot. Time to move on. You step back onto the raft, lighter somehow, like the memory plot took a little piece of you, but left behind something steadier in exchange. As you drift away, you glance back. The spiral of stones glows faintly in the moonlight. The plot doesn't wave. It doesn't need to. It just waits. Patient. Like soil. You glide now through stiller waters. The wind has taken the night off, and the lake feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something. Around you, the Chinampas seem to sleep. Even the frogs are quieter, offering the occasional polite croak like someone coughing in a library. Your guide points to a cluster of distant lights, barely visible through a curtain of hanging reeds. "That's the trade island," he says, "or what's left of it." You perk up. "Trade?" He nods. "Of course. Can't have floating farms without floating commerce." You steer gently toward the cluster, entering a narrow inlet where the canals meet in a star-shaped convergence. This is no ordinary Chinampa. It's a trading hub, built on layered platforms, walkways of bundled reeds, and floating tables that bob ever so slightly under the weight of goods and memories. It's mostly empty now, just a few lanterns swaying. But you can imagine the bustle. Farmers shouting prices across the water, rafts piled high with pumpkins, chili peppers, or baskets of flowers, and the ever-present smell of tamales wafting between haggling gardeners. Historians still argue whether these market rafts operated daily, weekly, or just during certain celestial alignments. Some codices suggest trade was regulated by priesthood calendars. Others imply it was whenever the tomatoes got restless. One fringe tidbit: there's a tale of a merchant who floated his whole Chinampa into the market, crops and all, just to make a dramatic point about bringing freshness directly to the buyer. He apparently lost half his squash to a poorly timed gust of wind, but earned eternal Chinampa bragging rights. Your guide steps off the raft and ties it to a mooring post made of driftwood and ambition. "Come on," he says. "Let's see what's left." You walk through the quiet market, past long-abandoned trade tables now covered in moss. A stall labeled "Herbs for Love and Sore Knees" has a sign hanging crookedly from a beam. Another reads, "Fish teeth and other useful oddities." You pause at a platform with a cracked ceramic bowl still holding the remains of dried corn. Next to it, a hand-painted sign that reads, "Tastes like last Thursday." A cat appears out of nowhere, stares at you, and disappears into the night like a judgmental fog. "Back in the day," your guide says, "this place buzzed, not just with goods, stories too. People traded gossip faster than chilies." You sit at one of the benches. The table is carved with names, symbols, and a very inaccurate duck. The surface is worn smooth by elbows, laughter, and deals made under stars just like these. Each crop had its own currency, he explains. Tomatoes were casual, beans were dependable, squash, high stakes. You don't trade squash unless you're ready for commitment. You raise an eyebrow. "What about amaranth?" He pauses, reverent. Amaranth was poetic, traded only between lovers or poets, preferably both. You lean back and picture it. This place alive with conversation, rafts tied together, floating stalls stacked with strange and beautiful produce. The clang of obsidian blades traded for salt. The rustle of feathers exchanged for laughter. People arguing over chili heat levels, only to settle the matter with a taste test that left half the crowd crying. The market wasn't just about crops. It was about connection. And even now, in its silence, you can feel it lingering, like the smell of food after a festival, or the echo of music in an empty plaza. Your guide lights a small lantern and places it on the table. "For tradition," he says. And suddenly, one by one, other lights flicker on across the market. From the shadows, a few late-night chinamperos appear, quiet, slow-moving, respectful of the hour. They place small items on the stalls, a gourd, a bowl of salt, a poem etched into bark. No words are exchanged, just the rhythm of arrival. It's like the market never truly closed. It just rests. And tonight, it stirs. You walk once more through the stalls. At one, someone offers you a tamale wrapped in dark green leaves. You accept. It's warm, rich, and has just the right amount of chili to remind you you're alive. A sign above this stall reads, "Suggested price, one smile." You pay gladly. Back on the raft, you glance over your shoulder as the market fades behind reeds. The lights remain a little longer than expected, then wink out, one by one, like a bedtime story turning its own pages. The water is glass again. The sky has begun its slow descent toward dawn, and your raft glides forward, heavier with stories, lighter with time. You lean against the raft's edge now, warm tamale still sitting pleasantly in your belly, the lantern glow behind you fading into memory. Around you, the lake is velvet dark, stitched with the glittering threads of stars. There's a hush to the night now, a kind of reverent stillness that only comes when even the frogs have said their last jokes. Your guide doesn't speak for a while. He simply steers, the poles stirring the water like someone slowly making soup from sky. Last stop, he finally murmurs, where the Chinampas go to sleep. You raise an eyebrow. They sleep? Everything does, he says, even floating dirt. You follow a narrowing canal lined with drooping willow trees, their branches brushing the surface so gently that even the moon's reflection doesn't ripple. The air is cool here, with a hint of mint and damp bark, as if the earth just brushed its teeth and slipped into pajamas. Ahead, a wide clearing. No crops, no rafts, no signs. Just water. Lots of water. And barely visible beneath it, the skeletal outlines of old Chinampas, sinking slowly, peacefully, into the lake's memory. This, your guide says, is the resting place. You float into the open space. The lake here is deeper, clearer. Through the surface you can see faint wooden frames beneath the water, like bones of long-forgotten gardens. Some still have reed posts sticking up. Others are fully submerged, their outlines soft and green with algae, embraced by time. These are the Chinampas that gave everything, he says, worked till their roots dissolved, then let go. You say nothing. The hush here isn't the kind you interrupt. Historians still debate how long a Chinampa could last. Some say a few decades, some say centuries if cared for properly. But eventually, even the most lovingly tended floating garden would begin to dissolve, edges eroding, roots weakening, soil returning to the lake bed. One fringe theory? A few elders believed that a Chinampa chose when to rest, that if a gardener ignored the signs, caving edges, sluggish growth, cranky ducks, the garden would simply unhook itself one night and drift away. Not out of spite, just readiness. You peer over the edge, or below, one old frame still has a bit of netting. A clump of vines rests across it like a forgotten scarf. Another holds what might have once been a scarecrow, now nothing but a tangle of sticks and moss, arms open as if mid-embrace. There's no sadness here, just stillness, a feeling of exhale. Your guide begins to hum, low, rhythmic, ancient. A melody that sounds like rocking chairs and faded sunsets. You join in, quietly. The lake listens. This is how we say thank you, he says. Not with applause, with presence. You drift silently across the sleeping garden cemetery. Occasionally, your raft passes over an island so far gone it looks more like a memory than a structure. You swear one of them still has a single cornstalk poking up, ghostly, glowing faintly. But maybe it's a trick of the water. You think back to the spiral compost plot, to the moonlit planting, The whispering seeds, the memory platform, the trade island, the raft of runaways. Each one gave you something, and now this last place asks for only one thing in return: stillness. You give it gladly. You and your guide float in silence. No paddling, no talking, just the weightless drift of understanding. This is where the Chinampas go when they're done giving, and somehow it feels like the perfect place for endings, or beginnings. Eventually your guide moves again, quietly poling the raft toward a narrow outlet marked by a small wooden archway carved with flowers. A dragonfly lands on it, stares at you, and nods as if to say, "Nice work." You nod back. As you leave the resting ground, you glance one last time behind you. The water smooths over the sleeping plots like a blanket, and the stars above ripple softly in thanks. You emerge from the quiet waters of the Chinampa graveyard, as if surfacing from a dream. One of those long, patient dreams that stays with you even after the sun rises. The canal ahead winds gently eastward, where the faintest whisper of dawn begins to tint the horizon with blush and silver. Your guide doesn't say much now. He doesn't have to. The raft knows the way. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth, flower pollen, and whatever secrets the lake hasn't finished telling. The Chinampas you pass now are awake. You can feel it. Somewhere, a duck snorts itself into consciousness. A bird trills uncertainly, then decides it's too early. Even the crops seem to sit up straighter, leaves reaching toward that vague promise of morning, like sleepy arms stretching under warm blankets. This is the transition, the liminal hour where everything is both ending and just about to begin. You glide past a farmer gently tossing seeds into a nursery plot, the rhythm of his throw matching the soft slosh of water against wood. He doesn't look at you, but he knows you're there. On another plot, a woman stands ankle-deep in soil, pressing something, maybe amaranth, into the damp earth with the calm grace of someone who's done this every day of her life, and still loves it. Historians agree that this was the secret to the Chinampa system's success: continuity, the quiet devotion. Generations passing knowledge down not with lectures but with muddy hands and shared tamales. But they also debate what finally ended the golden era of Chinampas. Was it colonization, water diversion, urban sprawl, one fringe idea? Some say the Chinampas didn't vanish. They simply went dormant, waiting for the right kind of gardener to return. You like that theory. You pass a young boy on a tiny raft. He's pulling up a bucket of water, examining it closely, then whispering something to the surface before tipping it over a squash plant. He catches your eye, shrugs, and grins. "Water listens," he says, like it's the most obvious thing in the world. You return the grin. As the canal bends once more, the skyline begins to change. You glimpse the distant edge of modern buildings, sharp lines and glass, rising like a second dawn behind the trees. But here, in this floating mosaic of mud and memory, time moves differently. You begin to realize that you haven't just wandered through a farming system. You've wandered through a worldview, a way of living that treats dirt like story, water like kin, and every single seed as a sacred maybe. Your raft glides toward the original launch point, where a rickety dock waits with a small bundle of fresh flowers tied to its post. A nod of greeting, or maybe farewell. The guide taps the edge of the boat. Do you remember what I said at the start? He asks. You think. That floating gardens aren't supposed to work? He nods. And yet here they are. You step off the raft, feet landing softly on the dock. Behind you, the water ripples once, twice, then settles. Ahead, the sky yawns into full morning. The Chinampas begin to hum again, not loudly, just enough for those still listening. And maybe now, that includes you. So now, as you lie there, eyes soft, breath slower, mind floating gently somewhere between night and morning, just remember, even the most improbable things can work when they're tended with care. Like floating farms, like dreams you swore wouldn't take root. The Chinampas didn't need permission from gravity. They simply wove reeds, laid down mud, and built life upon the water. Quietly, consistently, with joy and a little mischief. And when they were tired, they let go, drifted into rest, trusting someone would come along someday, with muddy hands and a good idea. You, perhaps. The moon is long gone now, tucked beneath the far edge of the world, and the stars have faded into the soft blue hush of morning. But down beneath your eyelids, behind the gentle rhythm of your breath, something still floats. A garden, a spiral, a memory made of water and soil and laughter. And it waits for you. Not loudly, just enough to be heard if you're still. So sleep easy tonight. You've walked among the floating. You've planted something in the dark. And even now, as your body drifts off into the hush of sleep, the garden grows. Word count, 300. End of script. Sweet dreams.